if we're going to recreate school that's going to get our kids ready for the AI age going forward, first principles, what would you do? The first and most important, which is the most radical thing we say, is
U.S. high schoolers at our historic lows in reading, math, and science. Americans today perceive college as far less important. Today, college graduates, they're the longest being unemployed. That's not sustainable.
We've known for 40 years how kids could learn 2, 5, or 10 times faster. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in a teacher in front of a classroom model.
We've really figured out how to use technology to deliver these really incredible learning results and do it in a fraction of the time.
Is everything perfect? What do you guys worry about? I love what you're doing. I just want to understand what's the flip side of the equation here.
You know, the biggest issue.
Now that's a moonshot, ladies and gentlemen.
Everybody, welcome to Moonshots. Today, we're going to be speaking about the future of education and the role of AI in education. And this is not just for K through 12 and university, it's also for reskilling, right? Something that this rapid pace of AI is going to require every major company to start doing soon enough. This is a topic that we've been very outspoken about here on Moonshot, specifically how secondary and post-secondary education is failing us. It's failing our kids. It's not preparing them for the near term, let alone the medium-term horizon. We're going to be diving into a new education model called Alpha Schools. I'm a fan. That's gotten rave reviews, and discuss the pros and cons of AI-driven education. Today, we're joined by the leadership of Alpha Schools, Mackenzie Price and Joe Lamont. Mackenzie is the co-founder and CEO of Alpha Schools. It's a K through 12 program built around a 2-hour learning model that she helped to pioneer. Prior to Alpha Schools, Price was for 17 years in the lending business and also working at Trilogy, a Stanford grad with a degree in psychology. She began questioning traditional schooling when she saw her own kid begin to lose enthusiasm for learning. I'm also proud that Mackenzie is an Abundance 360 member. All right, and Joe Lamont is the founder and CEO of ESW Capital and Trilogy, a billionaire entrepreneur who is actively playing a central role in funding and scaling Alpha Schools and playing the role as the principal, which I find incredible. He's built his fortune by buying and systematizing software companies, a playbook he's now applying to education. So first off, welcome, Mackenzie. Welcome, Joe. Good to have you guys.
Thanks for having us, Peter. We love talking education, and
I know you do.
Excited to be here.
And
Yeah,
of course,
thank you very much.
I've got my much smarter, much more brilliant moonshot mates, Salim Ismail and DB2. Guys,
good evening.
Welcome to the party here.
And let me start by saying thank you for your service, because you don't see a lot of highly successful people turning back to work on K through 12 education. There's no real big money in it, and it's purely a work of good in the world. So thank you so much for working on it.
Yeah, for sure. What I'd like to do is actually kick off by sharing a few slides that show the state of education in America today. And it's not that great. So let me share these here. So here we go. This is unfortunate and very.
Only 35% of 12th graders are at or above reading proficiency, down from 40% in 1992. 22% of seniors are math proficient. 31% are science proficient. I don't know. I think like if you look at the way that AI is able to educate people and how they're able to personalize different things, it's just so above and beyond of what is capable now. Like you could have multiple AI teachers to an individual student, whereas right now it's like one teacher to 30 to 40 students in a classroom. And the outreach that they give is just astronomically more versus what's able to give right now.
Shocking. So U.S. high schoolers at our historic lows in reading, math, and science. Only 35% of seniors in high school, 12th graders, are at or above the reading proficiency level. This is down from 40% in 1992. Only 22% of seniors are math proficient, and only 31% are proficient in science. All right, and this is going into a world where math and science and reading is so fundamentally critical for us. On the flip side of secondary education going towards college, here are some other numbers that are seriously troubling. And these blow me away, but they're very real. So Americans today perceive college as far less important. So back in 2010, 75% of Americans thought that college was important for your kids. That has dropped down from 75% to 35%. And as a result of this, we're beginning to see colleges going bankrupt. At the same time, tuition has grown 893% since 1983 as we're demonetizing and democratizing everything else. The cost of going to college is going up. And then here's the killer, that today college graduates are the group that are out of jobs the longest. They're the longest being unemployed. And so for me, that just that's not sustainable, right? I mean, Joe and McKinsey, you want to lean into those challenges right now?
I don't know where to even start other than it is a very disappointing picture. And, half of seniors in high school today graduate knowing as much math as a 99th percentile third grader. And that's a pretty troubling statistic along with what's going on. But I think it really points to the fact that, schools aren't preparing people for, the near future, as you mentioned, and more importantly, what this world is going to look like, with AI. And it's even more critical that in addition to making sure that young people have academic knowledge in their brains to be successful.
I gotta use the washroom. I'll be right back.
and be great critical thinkers, we have to instill all of the other life skills that are going to be needed so that they can be adaptable in this new world and be able to keep up, and not just keep up, but stay on the frontier of what human knowledge is required. And we see this with parents all the time. Parents are coming to us with their little children saying, what in the world should school look like in this day and age? What is it supposed to be delivering? 10, 15 years from now. And that's the challenge that Joe and I are excited every day to take on.
The data shows that at Alpha School, you're able to deliver a full academic program with only 2 hours a day of academic education. We'll talk about the life skills portion in a moment. And that you're educating your students at, I think it's like 2.5 to 3 times faster, and still scoring in the 1%, top 2% of the country. And I looked at some numbers here, and it shows that on average SAT scores, Alpha School graduates are at 1410, compared to the national average at 1,024, roughly 400 points lower. And that puts Alpha School graduates in the top 94 percentile.
Well,
Joe,
actually,
yeah?
I'll correct you on that.
Please.
1410 is actually the average for our entire high school student body, freshmen through seniors. Our average SAT score for our seniors is 1535.
Okay.
And the reason I think that's important to say isn't just to brag on how awesome our students are, but really to show and highlight how easy it is to excel when students get a mastery-based kind of tutoring experience, which is what has been made possible in this model of education. We believe, any student is capable of being 99th percentile when it comes to reading and writing and math and science and being able to crush their APs. And of course, the beautiful part of it is it doesn't take all day chained to a desk plus hours of homework at night in order to get those results. We've really figured out how to use technology to deliver these really incredible learning results and do it in a fraction of the time.
Yeah. So back to scores and academics and, the 2 hours, and I will, as the principal, I was just in the meeting this week where they were taking some practice tests, the freshmen. And the freshmen's goal this year is to have a minimum of 1410 as their SAT score as freshmen. So we have some who are already over 1,500 as freshmen, which you can think about when you talk about, wow, think of how much time that opens up for the rest of what they want to do during high school. But aside from that, how do we do it? We've known for 40 years how kids could learn 2, 5, or 10 times faster. So there's a whole field of learning science that very few people know of, but it's been around for 40 years. The graduate schools of education of Stanford or Oxford or Harvard have been studying this, how kids learn and develop. Papers back when I was in high school, Bloom's Two Sigma is a, seminal paper where, the paper talked about how kids could learn, all kids could learn and get to the top 2%, every kid, which you're seeing that data in Alpha, sort of 40 years later. And so what we've done, and the reason it hasn't been implemented though, is if you read the papers, and there's probably 10,000 of them that have been published, over the last 40 years, they all say kids can learn this fast. Unfortunately, it doesn't work in a teacher in front of a classroom model.
That's incredible.
And
because that's the assumption.
Yeah. Well, it's what every parent, one of the things I've realized, after I became principal 3 years ago was every parent wants their kid educated the way they were. And we don't know any different. And when I sit in the room with some of these learning scientists, they will sit and say, we've known for 40 years teacher in front of the classroom is the worst way to teach kids. And I'm like, whoa, we, like the people in this room, right? Every parent in America thinks a teacher in front of the classroom is the best way to teach kids, right? And it's that dynamic fundamentally that, we have to educate parents on and show that this new way, right, that is grounded in learning science, right? We've known how this works. We know
Well,
everything from the best ways to teach to the chemistry of the mind to be able to do this.
and for the
Joe-
parents, it's what they knew. It's how they grew up, right?
Yeah.
And so you get this cascading generational effect.
Joe, I've heard you talk about what you call the 5 dimensions that make a school 10 times better than at least the schools that we all went to school. And if you could recount that, because I found, number one, the idea of being able to make something 10 times better is something you typically don't think about in terms of schools.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
So, back to when McKinsey and I were working on this, if, you sit down and you say, the school's been the same for over 100 years. And if we're going to recreate school that's going to get our kids ready for the AI age going forward, first principles, what would you do? Just ground up, what are the core things you'd really want to do? And so the first and most important, which is the most radical thing we say, is kids must love school, right? If we're going to put our kids in it for a decade plus, kids should love school. And we actually measure it where over 90% of our kids love school. We measure every week, we ask them. And over the last year, we actually upped it where we actually say, would you rather go to school or go on vacation? And 40 to 60% of our students say they'd rather go to school than go on vacation. A lot of it depends on what the vacation is, depends on what the workshop they're doing. The highlight of my 10 years principal was this before summer, 6 months ago, the 2/3 of the Alpha High students sent an email and said, we don't want to take summer break. Can you keep the school open? And back to, we all know, you'd never catch me at high school asking if I could go to summer school. But that principle and just talking about love of school, it's one where when you think about it, like when we all build businesses, just from the business world, you want to build an organization that people love to come to work for, right? Yet those same people, when they sit and look at their kids and say, what's school supposed to be? They're like, you're not supposed to love school. It's supposed to suck, right? School's it's spinach. It's not supposed to be that. Like, we have this mental model that for everything else in our life, we're like, yeah, you totally should build an organization that people love, right? With school, we just had this backward way of looking at it. So that the first principle and the core and the reason we work is because of that core principle. And when we talk to other schools about adopting this, they all ask about the ed tech. Oh, you have this engine that teaches kids, so much faster. And we stand up and say, look, if you're not willing to rebuild your school around the concept that kids must love school more than vacation, this isn't going to work, right? And that core principle really, really matters. And that's what sort of everything that we do is downstream of that.
That's an incredible achievement, by the way. Congratulations.
Yeah, those statistics are mind-blowing.
Hey everybody, you may not know this, but I've got an incredible research team. And every week, myself and my research team study the meta trends that are impacting the world. Topics like computation, sensors, networks, AI, robotics, 3D printing, synthetic biology. And these meta trend reports I put out once a week enable you to see the future 10 years ahead of anybody else. If you'd like to get access to the Meta Trends newsletter every week, go to diamandis.com/metatrends. That's diamandis.com/metatrends.
It's actually, when you think about it, if you step back though, we spend an enormous amount of money on educating kids. Like you talked about how people don't go into a business, but we spend over $1 trillion for K through 12, right? I mean, we're spending 20,000 plus a kid. Some cities spend over $40,000 a student. And if you think about it, you're like, okay, I got a 10-year-old and you're going to give me 20 grand and I have to educate them and make them love every day. that's actually not the hardest problem in the world, right? That's a lot of money where you can actually build a day to have them both love it and learn.
So loving school is the first dimension. What else
Yeah.
follows that?
The second one is kids should learn 10 times faster. So back to this whole concept, and this is where sort of I got in is, we sat down and built this engine over the last 3 years where we basically took all the learning science and we took AI tutors, not chatbots, and we can get into why chatbots are cheap bots. And if chat GPT in schools is terrible, but if you take AI, generative AI, and you take learning science, and you generate personalized lessons plans for every kid at whatever level they are, those kids can learn 10 times faster.
Did
And
you
how
build or
we-
buy? Did you build or buy that tech? I'm curious.
So we started by using off-the-shelf apps and then building around it, right? Sort of this AI wrapper around everything, and we can talk of how to do it. We now, for the most part, we have both sort of the foundation, this platform called TimeBack, and we use some third-party apps that are best in class. So for any of you listening, Math Academy is the best app, and then you can just go download it. It's awesome. If you actually care about learning science, the Math Academy way is 500 action-packed pages of all the concepts of these, 40 years of learning science that you should read. And they're a great team. We love to partner with them on it. We built a bunch of our own apps, Alpha Write, Alpha Read, et cetera, that sit on the platform as well. We put in over $100 million into this platform. So it's a big lift on being able to do this. But what we have today is a learning engine that teaches kids basically K through 12 at 10 times faster than if they sat in class.
Okay, you gotta
Now-
love it. It's 10 times faster. What you hit number
And-
3?
And then the second part is, you come into school for 2 hours, right? And because we don't, we learn over 2x in 2 hours. And so back to what matters is then what do you do the rest of the day? Because
Yeah.
parents don't want you to send the kids home right after 2 hours. They got to be there all day. And so then what do you do with the rest of the day? And it's you teach them all these valuable life skills that we all think are important for the future, because academics is not enough to get your kid ready. And so we have our Alpha Life Skills curriculum, which is leadership and teamwork, right? Storytelling and public speaking, entrepreneurship and financial literacy, socialization and relationship building, and grit and hard work. And so in the afternoon, you're getting all these killer workshops, right? Team-based, super fun workshops run by adults, right? In this environment that are teaching them all of those life skills to get them ready for the real world. And that's where, if you see all the excitement and why we get so much hype, besides the academics, you sort of see what these kids do. We have kids, we have fifth graders, running food trucks and running Airbnbs for their entrepreneur workshop, right? And just all these crazy TED Talks, right? Just we have an Alpha High student who actually today submitted her research to Nature, which no high school student in history has actually been published in Nature, and so just crazy great accomplishments because they have this awesome, afternoons to work on it.
Mackenzie, can you dive a layer deeper for moms and dads and kids watching this to you arrive at the school and what's the experience like? Can you sort of paint the picture for us?
It's such a great question because people just don't understand what a school looks like where kids actually cry at the end of the week saying, why do we have to have breaks on the weekend? Why can't we go to school 7 days a week? They just don't understand. And I think people often think, okay, this is some AI school. It's like robo Terminator, dystopian, anti-socialized children. And nothing could be further from the truth. In fact, what's happened is the model of the day is one where kids get so much more time to interact with each other and to interact with the adults that are in the school building because of how we've set it. So, you walk into school, first of all, it feels more like a WeWork space than a traditional classroom. One of the things, Joe and I both bonded over our mutual dislike and disdain for traditional school. And so we think, again, school should be a fun, exciting place that comes in. Kids start out, yeah.
The part that you didn't like about traditional schools were what? Teacher in the front and everybody at the desk?
For me, and I think Joe and I were similar, I was always wondering, like, how is whatever I'm learning going to relate to something I'm actually interested in doing? Like, where am I going to make, use for this in my life? What am I going to do? And it was just so boring. I just found it incredibly boring. And I also think traditional school is fundamentally a place where they are teaching kids to sit still, raise their hand, don't talk unless called upon, ask permission to go to the bathroom. And, it really hasn't changed that much. And what we're wanting to do at our schools is teach kids all these awesome life skills. And that starts with, you walk in at the beginning of the day and our kids all come together and they do what we call a limitless launch. Think Tony Robbins for kids. This is a chance when they get together and they'll do some sort of challenging, often physical sort of experience together. And it's when we start incorporating some growth mindset strategies and practices that they take into the rest of the day. Then they go into their 2-hour core learning block. This is the academic period of the day. And this is when kids are on computers. The key difference here from when people think of, COVID Zoom classroom time is that kids are getting this one-to-one interaction on the computer that's meeting them at the level and pace where they're challenged. They're in what we call like the zone of proximal development, where it's the lessons that they're getting aren't too hard that they turn off and not so easy that they're sort of bored and disengaged. Throughout that time, they take breaks every 30 minutes, get time to stretch and play and be a little bit more flexible with kind of what their best learning environment is. And by lunchtime, they're finished with their academics and the rest of the school day is these super fun workshops. And so that's everything from, 5-year-olds who are learning how to climb a 40-foot rock wall or swim in the deep end of the pool to high school students that are out building real businesses and, doing big things. And there's just so much energy there. And that's what we found is so cool about this kind of this opportunity that kids have to get more socialization and time with each other. And one of the things Joe mentioned in those first 3 pillars of what we believe makes a school 10 times better, the 4th pillar is actually what enables us to deliver all of that, which is we have transformed the role of the adult in the classroom. Instead of having to spend their time creating lesson plans and delivering lectures and grading papers and homework, which we don't even have homework, by the way. Our teachers, we call them guides, their sole job is focus on motivational and emotional support, basically holding kids to really high standards, saying like, hey, you are capable, you can do big impossible things, and providing the support and the mentorship and the coaching that these kids need to be able to do great things. And so that human element has been able to be put really front and center. And that's what helps us make sure that kids are loving school and learning twice as fast in 2 hours and developing life skills. And then that leads to sort of that 5th pillar, which I think we all as parents can relate to. Ultimately, what we really care about is, are our kids growing up to be good human beings? Do they have character and integrity? And so for us, that 5th pillar is character and culture and classmates. Who are these kids being raised to be and who are they surrounded by? And that sort of ties everything that I think makes the culture at Alpha so attractive to so many families around the country is, when you can combine phenomenal, kick-ass academics along with developing these life skills, and then do it in a nurturing, caring environment where things like socialization is actually practiced and coached on, as opposed to just saying, hey, we hope you survive, the mean girl cafeteria world, and eventually get through. I think that's kind of what we've done. And those 5 pillars is what, every day, everybody in our organization, wakes up saying, how can we make sure that Alpha is a 10x better experience, and really redefines what parents should expect out of their kids' school.
Dave, I see you itching for a question here.
I want to visualize even better this idea of a WeWork-looking school, because it just jumps out at me immediately. You see all the little chairs lined up with the little folding desk and the lecture in the front, and you've got rows and rows and rows of these rooms in any school, middle school or high school, and it's all wasted space. And now you're saying, no, get rid of all that. Now make it feel much more like a work environment. But I imagine it's not like our office, right? It's probably somewhere in between, because it's got to be more school-like.
Yeah,
what does it look like?
I think it's picture like a really comfortable environment. In fact, I was in our kindergarten and first grade classroom at one of our schools this morning, and you've got some kids who are standing at a stand-up desk, because those are some of the kids who realize they like being able to just move their feet as they're doing their work. You've got another group of kids who are sitting at a table, and there's a guide sitting right next to them, and they're working together. And my favorite, and I always see this when I walk into one of those classrooms, you'll see some kid who's like laying on a bean bag with his feet up against the wall, and he's got his computer on his laptop. And you might look at it and go, what's that kid doing? And I'll tell you what he's doing. He knows that he can get his work done and he can hit his goals, and he's kind of earned that privilege of being able to relax. And that's another thing, motivation is such a huge part of our culture at Alpha. And we've built in all these different motivation models to help kids be successful. And that can be everything from earning the privilege of getting to do your core work in a little tent fort, or a cubby thing with stuffed animals surrounding you. So it's just kind of fun. I think it's the kind of school environment that, again, when we kind of are saying we get to reimagine what education looks like and what school looks like, let's build a school from the ground up that just is a place where kids want to be. Right? We're asking kids to spend a dozen years of their life most of the time in a place, and it should be something that feels nurturing and caring and inspires just curiosity and exploration, not one of these, what I honestly think so many schools are just depressing, right?
So from the outside in, does it look like any other school with fields and field house, locker rooms and all that, and then you don't notice the difference till you get through the door?
No, I would say we're still a little different on that. Our schools, we've opened schools all over the country, and the way we've started this, because again, Alpha is such a foreign idea and concept to so many families. They need to see what it is. So we've opened schools up throughout the country, and we've started them small. So we'll have, schools with 25, 50 kids that are in that. You get a playground. Kids need to be outside. In fact, our students get, an hour and a half of just non-structured outside playtime every day, because that's something really important to have. But yeah, it's not quite the traditional thing. And the same is true with the way we do our workshops. Like, for example, I was at our middle school this week, and they're doing an incredible band music class, but they're creating a rock band. And as part of that, they're also learning about marketing and branding and mixing music in addition to playing instruments. You're not really going to walk into one of our schools and see kids all playing the recorder, as part of their traditional music class.
Well, I see a lot of our, when they reach college, because I teach at MIT and a little bit at Harvard and at Stanford, and the kids that go to school in England arrive a full year ahead of the U.S. educated kids. And they can use that to take basically either a year of tuition back in college, just getting advanced credits, or they can start a company while, take a semester or two to start a company, or just the extra time is worth its weight in gold. So if you start talking about, 10xing the rate of learning, I imagine, and 1,400 SAT score as a freshman, I mean, you got to figure you're in that same, maybe even a year ahead of that by the time you get to college.
Yeah. When you think about that time, for sure, 2 points. One, about your England comment. we have what we consider the world's best team of learning scientists who work for us. And what's, very amazing is, most of them come from England rather than the US. That, and in England, the academics actually have been going like this versus the US like that. And a lot of it's like these people from this team, who have been for 15 years, making sure that those concepts were put into the curriculum, which is why they're ahead. We're now putting it into our platform so everybody can get it. But that concept of just having lots of extra time, in our high school, they spend our high school is a little different in that you spend 4 years working on a passion project, right? So you have if you're going to come to Alpha High, it's not because you want to be quarterback of the Westlake football team, right? You'll go to Westlake if you're going to do that, but you're going to come because you want to say there's something I want to work on, right? That I really love. Now they change their mind, they're kids, right? And then they these ideas change. But can you imagine if you said I had 4 years to work on something I really loved and get really good at it? And so we do. We have one of our seniors who's putting on a Broadway musical, right? And it's going to be the first all-teen, all-produced, musical. And she spent everything from I have to source the singers off TikTok to music rights, right? To how do you fill a whole venue and all the sales and marketing. All of those things was she took her, I'm an arts theater girl, right? And now has had years to actually work on it, as she loves.
Can I dive into a little bit about the guides? All right. So you don't call them teachers, you call them guides. And I'm curious how you source them, right? Super excited that Alpha is going to be opening up a school in my hometown in Santa Monica. How do you go about sourcing your guides? What's their background? Talk a little bit more about their mission. Are they just not traditional teachers? Were they the top teacher someplace else? Help me get my handle around that.
I'll give you from the business aspect and Mackenzie can talk on the other side. The biggest issue back to scaling schools. Schools don't scale because you're limited by teachers, right? That's always the critical aspect. And so when I first looked at the teacher problem, how are you going to be able to scale this? The 5 things of what is required for a great teacher in a traditional school, not us, is you have to be a domain expert. I'm great in 7th grade science. You have to be good actually in teaching kids, right? And not just a researcher. The 3rd dimension is you have to connect and motivate students, right? The 4th is you have to be good with parents. And the 5th, depending on the organization, administration, right? And so you look at that and sort of outside of the business world, you ask an HR guy 101, he's going to say that's a complicated spec, right? Those are different skills. It's hard to have all 5 skills in one person, right? That's a hard spec. And so in education, what we've decided, the way we solve that problem is to underpay them, and then we're like, oh my God, no one applies for this job. It's the hardest spec in the world and we're going to underpay them. And you're like, well, this, and so, fresh set of eyes coming in here, if we're going to rebuild this, every HR guy is like, well, simplify the spec or pay more or both. And so at Alpha, that's what we've done very much in our model is those first 2 items, which is 7th grade science expertise or how to teach it to kids, the 10,000 papers of learning science of the best way to instruct kids. We don't need, because the AI tutor, right, our software, Timeback software does that for them. The 3rd dimension, you have to connect and motivate kids. You have to be the world's best, right? We push that to the max. So if you look at our students, a great book that, I don't know if Dr. Yeager's 10 to 25, How to Motivate Kids from 10 to 25. Right?
This is psychological motivations, right?
Correct. And he has this concept of the mentor mindset, which is teens need high standards and high support, right? And so he actually has developed our training program for our guides, right? Which is how do we have guides who are able to hold high standards for kids, but also provide the high support to get them there. And so you have to be the world's best. And so about, what is it? Mackenzie had the last count. It was like half come from traditional teaching background.
Just about half of our guides come from a traditional teaching background, and these are generally people who were, phenomenal, loved the idea of working with kids, but realize that that traditional system is just built to fail on there. But we get people who we have a guide who was the principal of the year in the state of Florida in 2020, and after 14 years working as a principal, she was attracted to come back to Alpha because her desire was to get back in the classroom and impact and interact with kids. But in addition to that, we get the majority of our guides come from different backgrounds. They wouldn't have been interested in a traditional teaching world, but they were experts in motivation. They come from professional and college level coaching and athletics. Because think about how much motivation and life skill development is taught through sports. In fact, that's the way most of us got a lot of our life skills development growing up. They come from corporate backgrounds, executive backgrounds. What they all have in common, though, is this idea of like, okay, I want to be able to positively impact and motivate and connect with kids and serve as a mentor. And then, of course, to Joe's point, we've taken the opposite strategy as traditional education. We believe that anybody who is going to put their blood, sweat, and tears into working with, this next generation, they deserve to be paid well. So our guides start at six-figure salaries, and that's part of what has enabled us to really attract incredibly talented people. And I will say our process for applying to be a guide at one of our schools it's very challenging. I mean, we really have a high bar for who we want to be impacting and mentoring and coaching.
That's
our kids.
really fundamental, though. That's like if you said so. In any given high school or middle school, you're going to have a math teacher, an English teacher, a history teacher, and their branding, their personal branding, is tied to this very narrow kind of topic. And so, by throwing all that out, of course, you're going to get a much better standard in terms of the other baselines, the motivational skills and everything else. So is there any concept of a specialist at all across the guides, or is everybody is purely...
Yeah. So, and just to put some numbers behind it, right? We had 80,000 people apply for our teaching roles, right? So in our world, we have just,
How many guides per school?
And so, and this is where, to answer that second follow-up question, at the kindergarten level, we actually have 6 to 1 ratio of student teacher at Alpha. And the reason for that is that's the one place where our apps aren't fully developed, which is bootstrapping kids into reading. It's still not there. And so when you talk about specialists, we still have reading specialists to make sure kids get bootstrapped. Once you can read, I can teach you math, I can teach you all the other subjects. But basically the detection of a 4-year-old, the AIs aren't good enough yet. We think we need another 18 months before AIs can do that.
So that'll crumble too. That's interesting.
It will.
Well,
it will. But even then, you'll still have 5 to 6 to 1. Oh, good. Yeah.
Yeah, let me add a mom's perspective in here. Because in addition to reading, think about, I mean, you guys all went through this with your kids. Like kindergarten, we want our kids to feel loved and welcomed. And we want kids who come into school curious and excited to maintain that. And we believe having these awesome adults who are supporting these kids and helping them do big things. Our kindergartners learn how to ride a bike and do a 5-mile bike race as a team together. And, as they're, I was just talking to one of our guides who was talking about a kid who was really feeling challenged around riding a bike, but this guide knows that he loves animals. And so she has a stuffed kangaroo and she runs alongside of him and says, "Can you go faster than the kangaroo?" Now, by the way, our guides are having to get their exercise points in, on that too. But that's the other thing that's just so critical is what is the point of school? In addition to obviously education and socialization and relationship building, we need these adults who are kind of mentoring. And one other thing I'll bring up, Dave, when you were talking about specialists, the other fundamental skill that we have to learn how to teach young people is the ability of learning how to learn something. And when you talk about kids who are going off and building businesses, in 4th grade doing jewelry making businesses or building mountain bike parks or Broadway plays or mental health apps, how in the world would you find a specialist who's an expert in that, as a teacher. Instead, our guides also have that skill of, you know what, we're going to come alongside each other and we're going to go learn how to become an expert in that field. We're going to learn how to connect you with experts in the field. Today I spent time with two of our high school students who are meeting with a really successful Hollywood producer who was connected by the school to give these kids some mentorship around, movie production and marketing. And that's one of the skills that our guides are really good at, is saying, okay, I can connect with a kid, see what they're interested in, and then help them go figure out how to go become an expert and jump in that field. So be careful, because we'll probably be reaching out to all three of you now for mentorship and connections with our students.
And I'm not sure I'm qualified.
Salim, you had a question, buddy.
And then the other part of our model, though, as you get older, we increase the ratio. So, and you guys have 14-year-olds, you said, by the time you're adolescent, you're like, whoa, there's too many adults around here. Give me some space. And so we actually, on the business model side, we take that money out of the guides and we put it into these workshops, right? These crazy afternoon workshops that they can go do everything. But if you also think about motivation, right? And these alternatives, right? We have ex-athletes, right? I have ex-NBA assistant coaches. Jermaine O'Neal is teaching a middle high school program, right? And you're just like, those kids will, because motivation is so important, right? They'll do anything, right? With we have ex-Olympians, right? Sets of coaches and athletes who are able to connect with these kids and provide that motivational and emotional support that you really want. And that's a lot of the magic that makes this work, is making sure you hire those, which is why we pay more, why we built our business model around doing it and source 80,000 of them, to find the right ones.
Well, that gives you a real head start on what's coming, too, because, the whole college curriculum at MIT moved online years ago, and it got off to a fast start, but then it completely fizzled. And the reason it fizzled is because it's so insanely boring to learn on your own through a browser. But what's coming next is the interactive AI version of that, and it's going to have exactly your favorite personality on the other side. So, right now when you talk to your high school math teacher, the person is who they are. They're not your perfect soulmate to talk to. The AI version of it can be any voice, any personality. It could be Shaquille O'Neal, reincarnated as a math teacher, whatever. It's going to be so incredibly engaging, and it's not quite ready yet. It'll be there within a year, but you're going to have such a head start having seen how these guides interact with the kids, who are just, the most naturally engaging people on the planet, and seeing the motivation that creates. So that'll match the AI version that comes onto that 2 hours a day when they're in front of the screen.
Yeah, we have one where our middle schoolers are allowed to pick their avatars. And, so for history, or in AP World History, they're all like, okay, Genghis Khan, right?
Yeah.
It's going to be my avatar. And it yells at them if they're not studying, right? And the kids are like, okay, we love this. They pick it. So.
Yeah, actually, I met with a couple of MIT junior or sophomores today, actually, that were saying that the Taylor series is now taught by Taylor Swift. And
right,
they got
exactly.
a real kick out of that. It's like, oh, okay, that's kind of cute. They're her avatar suddenly knows how to do.
I've like 1,000 questions here, but let me kick off a couple. One is when you hire a teacher from the traditional side, there's obviously a transition period to kind of operating in this new modality. What's the average length of time does that take?
Well, one thing that's interesting, the last step in our hiring process, when they've gone through a series of interviews and tests, everything from cognitive aptitude tests to case studies and having to design workshops, the last thing that they do is they spend time in one of our schools shadowing and basically working. What's really interesting about that is once they get to that point, the most common reason for falling out and not getting hired is actually traditional teachers And the reason is they're not willing to jump in and engage with the kids, kind of get at their level, because traditional teachers are so used to kind of standing forward or standing back and sort of pointing, do this, do that, and being here. But for those traditional teachers who do make it through our process and come into our school, we've got some really great training that they're able to jump into, and just being a part of being willing to jump in. And so that's everything from designing the Limitless launch activities that we do in the workshops. And the other big thing is helping them remember that their job is no longer to teach academics. So if you walk into one of our schools, you're not going to see one of our guides sitting down and showing a kid how to carry the one, or what to do. Instead, they're going to be helping kids, again, develop that skill of learning how to learn. So they might say, hey, did you check your resources? Were you able to find a video? Were you reading the explanation? And they're really working to coach on that. Now, they're also focused on motivation. An example of that, we just today in that kindergarten classroom, I was watching a couple of kids, when they would hit one of their academic goals, they would give a secret signal that the guides are watching, touch your nose. And that would signal, I hit one of my academic goals, and then that starts, get ready for it, a silent dance party. And that is a 5-second dance party where the guides would do this and the kid would do it. And then that was enough to get that kid psyched up and ready to say, okay, let me go hit my next goal. And it's just those little things that they can do. And then the other part of it, Dave, that you mentioned about how much more engaging, personalized, truly personalized learning with AI can be. I just want to take it also to what it looks like when you walk in a classroom. You can walk in a classroom and have 2 7-year-old boys sitting right next to each other, but each of them is working on something that's exactly at their pace. So, for example, you can have one 7-year-old kid who's doing algebra, while the kid right next to him, his friend, is working on his multiplication tables. And that's the beauty of personalized learning. It's not isolating. It's not making that kid have to march up 2 grades, to go sit with older kids, or even worse, being told by the school, you just need to chill out a little bit. You're too advanced. They can keep going and yet be right next to each other doing that.
Well,
and then having that collaborative environment. I also have to say the roller coaster that the kids incorporate when a kid hits a big goal, the whole class does a roller coaster ride, which again looks a little like this. Those who are not listening on video are missing the magic of this movement.
Incredible.
But that's the thing that these guides are so good at doing, is figuring out what is that motivation. And that's everything from the silent dance parties to the fact that we pay our students alpha currency and teach financial literacy concepts for hitting goals.
I love
that is really going
entrepreneurship,
with
baby.
Developing self-driven learners. Yeah.
So then what happens, what's the impact of that on the peer pressure? Everything I see in schools, you either care about your grades or you don't, and there's no room in between. And, if you're near the top of the class, you get into this group of people that are really competitive about their GPA, and those are the ones that end up going to MIT and Harvard. And then you're like, oh, I can't compete on that, so I'm completely competing on the basketball team. I'm going to put all my energy into that. And it's really sad, actually, because most of these kids would be great at both, but the basketball coach cuts them from the team, so you're not allowed to excel over there. And then the math teacher only cares about the top 5 students every year, and so you don't make the mind share of the math teacher, and everybody ends up bucketed in very irrational ways, and that peer pressure is just pathetic. But it must be completely different in your school.
Yeah, on the academic side, this is the difference between a time-based system and a mastery-based system. So all our kids, right, master their grade level of material. So they get 100s on their standardized tests, right, for each level. And so if you actually, this is back to this dichotomy of, as adults, because of our system, we see the world so differently, was if you ask alpha parents and say, can you get 100 on the, in our case, the Texas STAR is the state standardized test, fewer than 10% of the parents are like, yeah, of course you can get 100 on the Texas STAR. Only, GT kids, right? That kind of thing. If you ask the alpha students, 95% say you can get 100 because they have, right? Which is, in a mastery-based system, you don't move up to the next grade level until you master, right, what you're on. And the tutor is going to sit there, right? The system's going to give you the personalized lessons so you can. So all our students know they can crush their academics in 2 hours. It's also a function of when your classes are all top 1%, every grade level, every subject, all the students are like, oh, I can absolutely do well academically. And so back to the competition, it moves it in a time-based system, right? The two things that determine academic success in a standard school is it's IQ coded and it's Big Five conscientiousness coded. Are you a grinder, right? And those are the people who do naturally well, right? And that's 10% of the market, right? 90% of the kids don't. In a mastery-based system, everybody can. And if you ask your average alpha student, it's not about IQ, it's about effort. And that's why we call our software Time Back, where it literally tells the kid, you're 17 hours away, right? You're 5 hours away. And so it moves everything from I'm not smart enough or I'm not capable, which is so, right, debilitating, right? That's such a bad model that we just inflict on these kids to, oh, okay, well, I'm 5 hours away from mastering it and getting 100, right? And that's just a huge unlock around self-confidence and resilience and all that. And once again, can't do a teacher in front of a classroom.
I love this. I just want to say this for everybody listening here. The traditional school models are you start school at 100% score, and every time you get something wrong, your score goes down. In the traditional video game models, you start at 0 score, and every time you learn something, your score goes up. It's a completely different motivational system. And if you can tap into that as well as, what you said earlier, the best video game designers know how to just come in at that perfect level of challenge and frustration. Yeah, that's great.
If you think about learning and you think about this engine, because everybody's like, oh, these AI tutors and they're terrible. And, you can imagine generating personal lessons for every kid that's based on what are you trying to teach them? What is their knowledge graph? What do they know and not know? What is their interest graph, right? This is back to your, Taylor Swift's my interest graph or Genghis Khan or whatever it is, right? And then you can take into account cognitive load theory, which is actually the chemistry of your brain, how many working memory slots you have, how many reps you require to store to long-term memory to, change your schema. And the AI can generate a personal lesson for you that makes sure it's at 80 to 85% accuracy. Right? Not too easy, not too hard. At 99%, you're not learning, right? It's you already know it. And every game designer will tell you if you drop below 66, the kids disengage because it's too hard. So you can just imagine this unending stream of personalized content, right? For every kid right at their zone. And this is why you can learn 10 times faster, and we believe.
What do you do with kids that some are auditory listeners, some are visual learners, etc.? How do you navigate between the different learning styles that different kids have?
Fundamentally, in learning science, right, there's dual coding, which is it is better to get it both visually and auditory at the same time, right? So even though internally you think I'm a visual or I'm auditory, the actual science will show it's better to give it both at once. And so even though you have a preference, right, you need the reinforcement of both channels at once.
Let me ask some of the difficult questions that you probably are asked. So you're asking parents to trust more screens in the classroom at the same time that there's a backlash going on for screens with kids. So what do you tell parents, who don't want their kids on computers all the time? And then are you able to enforce sort of a distraction-free use of their laptop so their kids aren't going off to play Minecraft or some other video game?
Yeah, those are super valid concerns. Screen time and, bad screen time, even AI and bad AI. So these are all super legit concerns by parents. And here's how we look at it. And, parents who come in, how they look at it, which is we believe there's good screen time and bad screen time, which is if you can learn 10 times faster, right, and it frees up the rest of the day to do all these great workshops and life skills, it's worth that trade-off, right? Even if you don't like screens. And there are parents at Alpha who would say, I'm a no screen time household. And they're like, but if my kid can actually learn the academics in 2 hours instead of 6 and get that afternoons to do all these great things, that trade-off is worth it. That would be sort of dimension A. Dimension B is, to that point of AI, if you give kids ChatGPT in a school, right, 90% of them use it to cheat, right? Chatbots are cheat bots. And so unmanaged AI is bad, right? And so we don't have, in our mornings, we don't have chat functionality enabled. Like even in our world, we've tried, and even our best kids, they all use it to cheat, right? And you're all just, so
I have to imagine
turned it off.
people's preconceived notion of Alpha School is using ChatGPT in school as a mechanism for learning, but it's not. So when a kid's on your platform, they're not able to go to Gemini 3 or Grok 5 or whatever the latest is, and are they disallowed from going and playing their favorite video games as well?
Yes, you are. And so when you talk about chat functionality, what we tell the kids is, if you're using chat in the morning, you're probably cheating. But if you're not using it in the afternoon on these life skill workshops, you're probably failing, right? The student who's trying to do a musical needs help, right? So it's that dual sense that you have to have of that. But for putting facts, ideas, and concepts in kids' brain, ChatGPT sort of steals that away from the kids, and you want to fill kids with ideas. Now, what our AI use is basically, there's 2 dimensions of the AI use. One is generate the personalized lesson, right? And so it's the generative part of AI. It generates a dynamic lesson for the kid. Now, the second part of what it's doing is the vision models. So it is watching the screen, coaching you. So one of the things it's doing, and it's actually the more expensive part, like we basically will stream the screen at, to a soda model. We spend like 10 grand a kid right now, in AI tokens, because we're doing this, because the AI is watching the screen and it's saying, look, kid, you're scrolling, you're guessing the answers, or when you miss the question, you're not listening to the explanation and you're just trying to drive the next question without listening. And so it's coaching them into good self-driven learning habits. And the core of this, and this is sort of a key and why EdTech isn't the solution. We talk about EdTech's like 10% of the answer, right? Which is, everybody says to educate a kid, you need a motivated student and you need to put them in lessons of the correct difficulty. Not too easy, not too hard. EdTech does the second really well. But how do you do the motivated student part? For us, it's give the kids their time back, right? Where you say, look, engage in it. Once you finish the lessons, you get to do the workshops. Well, if you're not using the apps correctly, right? If you're skipping or guessing or, doing any of these anti-patterns, you're not going to finish in the 2 hours, right? And so we literally have a waste meter in the corner where it's like, dude, you're wasting 50% of your time.
That's mind-blowing. Those vision models only came into existence maybe a year ago, and you've already got them deployed. That's incredible. 10 grand a kid is a lot of token usage, though. That'll come down a factor of 10, but it's impressive that
we're going to get it down to on device. But that is and to be honest, like 3 years ago when we started, when I became principal, we literally had humans reviewing the video at night, annotating. Like, oh, wow, these kids aren't learning. Because you have to train a model. It's just like the, Tesla, autopilot.
Yeah, of course.
You have to train this model up of, okay, this is good learning. This is bad learning. What are these kids doing? Oh, wait, they're switching to another screen to ask ChatGPT. Oh, wait, they're playing Minecraft. And so all of those things, we're monitoring those. And, our unit of measure is XP, right? Which every video, right? Yep. Is 1 XP equals experience 1 minute of learning. Yeah. 1 XP is 1 minute of focused learning. And so the kids know that AI is deciding, was this a minute of focused learning? Okay, you get credit for it.
Yeah.
So,
that's just to make an analogy for the audience here, like if you've ever coached soccer or football or tennis, if you just imagine you could look at every single kid and study every footstep they take and say, oh, wait, that step to the right should have been a step to the left, but you're in their AirPods telling them one-on-one coaching of every single move, that team will just take off. And that the vision technology to actually do that through AI, with the AI looking at every single motion, that's brand new in the world. And it would work in coaching just as well as it works in screen monitoring for teaching. But I can just completely see how like every single action in the learning experience is now a measurable piece of data that can be personally analyzed. And it's brilliant to me that you actually had human beings trying to do that at night. That must have been the most laborious thing in the history of the world. But that's how you get a head start into knowing how you're going to deploy it with AI very soon thereafter. That's just
It'd be
so
awesome
cool.
to take your system and put it into a traditional school and see how much time is being wasted there.
Yeah,
90% is being wasted. I can tell you in any school, 90% is wasted, right? For sure.
Of course.
That's for sure. But and then just taking that last part that you were talking about, the data, what we have now and why our learning keeps increasing is we're the only ones in the world with a closed loop data cycle.
It's reinforcement learning for kids.
It is.
It's
so our learning science team comes up with an idea and they're like, okay, let's implement this new idea and see. They put it in, right, generate the lessons. The kids do the lessons. You measure the learning. Was this a better way to teach the kid in this particular kid or whatever? And then they can see the scores based on standardized test results and then adapt to the learning. And so to give you a concrete example, so in August, I stood in front of all the parents. I'm like, we got a new math curriculum, K through 12. Kids are going to learn more in 20% less time, right? We've made improvements. It's going to be 20% better. And 8 weeks later, at the end of the first session, I got up. I'm like, okay, good news and bad news. 4th through 12th, we're crushing it. We're above our thresholds. We're beating the 20%, metric. K through 3, we're not. The kids are getting lost, right, in the path. We gave them too much freedom. Freedom of choice got too much. So we're going to be changing that and changing that for the next 8 weeks, right? And I can tell you now we're back on track on that one. But that kind of science, it's learning science, it's little science.
Yeah.
How do you
it's
learn
identical. Peter and I went to 1X Robotics to interview Bert Bornick, and he had the exact same thing for the robots that are in the home. They gather every single motion, all the data comes back, gets transmitted into a nightly, learning process that retrains the model. So you've got the exact same thing in education with probably much more impact. Are you calling
our kids robots?
Well, Eric, when we podcasted Eric Schmidt, he said you get these loops. Google
learning
is a big
loops,
loop.
yes.
But this is a perfect example of one of Eric Schmidt's learning loops where the model will improve with that data.
Mackenzie?
And Dave, you were talking about sports, and think about how much time is spent studying game film to see how you can improve. And that's never been done when it comes to learning in academics. It's like, again, just hopefully you're good at school or you're not good at school, and that's where we'll be. And we actually give kids the coaching where they learn, what? The best way to go forward is actually to slow down, read the explanation, watch the video, and then take your time to, look at the question, before you go answer it. And that's part of what really puts learning in the kids' hands and gives them a sense of ownership over it. And they start seeing, what? I can get better. I can do better. I have the agency and the ability to improve if I put in the work and the good practices. And again, that completely changes the way that a kid sees himself. And that's really the magic.
This episode is brought to you by Blitzy, autonomous software development with infinite code context. Blitzy uses thousands of specialized AI agents that think for hours to understand enterprise-scale code bases with millions of lines of code. Engineers start every development sprint with the Blitzy platform, bringing in their development requirements. The Blitzy platform provides a plan, then generates and precompiles code for each task. Blitzy delivers 80% or more of the development work autonomously, while providing a guide for the final 20% of human development work required to complete the sprint. Enterprises are achieving a 5x engineering velocity increase when incorporating Blitzy as their pre-IDE development tool, pairing it with their coding copilot of choice to bring an AI-native SDLC into their org. Ready to 5x your engineering velocity? Visit Blitzy.com to schedule a demo and start building with Blitzy today.
I want to hit on some psycho-emotional side. So, some kids, in particular, I think male teenagers probably need more scaffolding than others, right? How do you think about that? And then the other side of the equation I want to ask is, how do you deal? Do you measure levels of stress and sort of the psychology of the kids to provide feedback and safety? So scaffolding first, and then sort of the psychological side of the equation next.
Yeah, it's interesting from a scaffolding perspective in this way, the earlier that we have kids come into our system, the better we can build on those habits, right? But you take, as you mentioned, a teenager, you get a kid who comes into us in middle school or high school, and they've had years of conditioning in, the traditional model, which is be passive, sit back, wait for someone to give information to you, and then move along whether you know it or not. And so
which is the worst place to be in life, right?
It is absolutely the worst place.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so there are some bad habits that kids have picked up, but here's the good news: is you can pretty quickly put kids into a situation where they're suddenly in a culture where they feel a sense of ownership around the culture, and where they've got adults who are practicing this mentor mindset with these kids of saying, hey, you are capable of doing big things. You may have thought in the past that you weren't a math kid, right? You weren't good at science. You're dyslexic, and therefore reading will never be your thing. That's not true. And let's put in some growth mindset. Let's give you some training around receiving feedback, around, being able to connect and do that. And so they get that help. And then when they also are met with the level and pace. And, here's a pretty scary statistic that I think it makes most parents kind of blood turn. We brought hundreds of students from all over the country into our Alpha school at the beginning of this school year. And as part of their onboarding, they do assessments so we can figure out where they are. And Joe stood in front of a parent